Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls, and you're listening to Rainbow Country.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, trans healthcare in Canada. Plus an hour 2, music from trans artists from around the world. All that lies ahead on episode 327, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, I'm Simone Denny.
Hi, I'm Mayor John Tory.
I'm Joey Lamar, best-selling author of Mambo Lips and Salsa Hips. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, trans healthcare in Canada with award-winning journalist, writer, and radio producer Rhea Rollmann, who joins me to talk about transforming transition-related surgeries in Newfoundland. We talk about her personal trans journey that's chronicled in an article that she wrote in the summer of 2021 for The Independent.ca. And later on in hour 1, a flashback to a 2015 interview that I did with Lorraine Zagato, who talks about some of the legacy of the iconic Canadian single, Rise Up. Plus on this episode in hour 2, music from trans artists from Africa, from America, and from Canada. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 327 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop is what I like to call the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. And on today's lesson from activist, author, and historian Tim McCaskill, the early days of Canada's LGBT community.
When we talk about the LGBTQ community as if it is something that just exists, I think we're indulging in wishful thinking. Communities aren't something that spring fully formed from the ether. They require some assembly. They need to be constructed. Still thinking about the 70s here, when I came out in Toronto, there were lots of different parts that didn't quite fit together. First, there were gay men who went to bars and baths. Most were pretty deeply in the closet. They shared a dirty secret and some overlapping friendship networks, but not much else. Then there were a self-proclaimed clutch of young activists around the body politic and the Gay Alliance Towards Equality, myself included, who tended to be a bit judgmental about anyone not properly out and willing to throat ram. In fact, one writer to the body politic called us the high-principled Jesus Christ farts of the movement. Then there were the new class of gay entrepreneurs who were establishing the first gay businesses along Church Street. The Community Homophile Association was perhaps the largest organization in town, and it was run by George Hislop, part owner of several of these businesses. The entrepreneurs saw the activists as troublemakers rocking a precarious boat, and we saw them as conservatives unable to embrace gay liberation. We felt much the same about MCC, the major gay-focused Christian organization at the time. When women from Chat, calling themselves the Cunts, broke off and denounced Hislop as a sexist in 1971, it made clear that a lot of women were also on a pretty different wavelength. Most lesbians were much more comfortable in feminist circles than hanging around with gay men. Not that they all agreed either. There were always the lesbian socialist feminists versus the radical feminist lesbians, and so on. Trans organizing was small and generally had little to do with any of us. Trans men were often concerned with distinguishing themselves from lesbians, and trans women were unwelcome in most lesbian spaces. Gay men were generally suspicious, unclear on the differences between sexual orientation and sexual identity. So it was all a bit of a hot mess. I suppose if you see community like a dysfunctional family where everybody fights all the time, you could call it a community. But if by community you mean people who are cooperating and fighting for a common goal, that probably didn't really happen until the 1980s, when we were all faced with challenges that we couldn't overcome alone. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, trans healthcare in Canada. Rhea Rollmann, hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that. You are an award-winning journalist. You are a writer. You are a radio program director. You're the program director for CHMR FM in Newfoundland, Newfoundland's only alternative. How long have you been there? How long have you been program director there?
Oh, golly. I have been back in this job around 5 years, I guess. Yeah, that sounds about right. The whole pandemic has been kind of a blur. But you know, our studios are back open. We've got all our DJs and programmers back in the studio again now, so it's starting to feel alive again.
Okay, summer 2021, transforming transition-related surgeries in Newfoundland. This is an article that you wrote in summer 2021 for the Independent.ca. First of all, the Independent.ca. What is the Independent? Talk to me about this publication.
Oh, it's our primary independent media source in Newfoundland and Labrador. It was a print newspaper back in the early 2000s, but it was a for-profit print newspaper. And then it didn't make a profit and shut down. And then it was revived in 2011 by a group of new writers and was redesigned as a kind of a media co-op, more or less. And that's when I got involved as a writer and editor. And so, yeah, we cover news, culture, all the stuff that the mainstream commercial media in the province does not cover. And you know, like most places, we're losing a lot of media in the province.
Especially local media.
Yes.
You know,
I mean, yeah, they're all being, bought up by national companies operating out of, Nova Scotia or Toronto. And even CBC is scaling back operations. It's really sad.
So transforming transition-related surgeries in Newfoundland, like I mentioned, this is an article you wrote in summer 2021. This article that you wrote, what is this article, at the heart of this article, what are you getting at?
Well, I started digging into it after my own experience, trying to access, after I came out as trans and started trying to access transition-related surgeries, and it was really hard. And I was surprised because everyone told me, great timing to come out as trans, because Newfoundland overhauled its policies around transition surgeries in 2019. So I was told, it's great, everything's covered, it's going to go great. That's not the case. The policy overhaul that happened in 2019, there are a lot of gaps that still remain, and so that's what I tried to dig into, to figure out what are those gaps, what's not working about the system, why, what is the fine print that's preventing so many people from accessing transition-related surgeries and medical supports in our province. So that's what I dug into for that piece.
And you wrote this article in hopes of what?
Well, I think in hopes of drawing awareness to the problems, ultimately in hopes of changing. I really wanted to flag, and the problem is a lot of folks, like trans healthcare in Canada is so confusing. It's because every province has its own policies around what it covers, what it doesn't cover, how it covers it. So it is incredibly confusing for a lot of folks to figure out, what's covered, how do I access gender affirming healthcare? A lot of doctors don't understand it either. Some newer doctors in some med schools are getting some exposure to trans healthcare, but a lot are not. And there's a lot of people in the system already, doctors who have been practicing for years, who get actually frightened when trans patients come to them, or when their current patients come out as trans, and they say, "Oh, I don't know how to support you. I don't know how to treat, how to prescribe hormones, or how to monitor your blood work, or to access surgery," and they try to put their patients off on other doctors. So there's a lot of problems when it comes to gender affirming healthcare in this country. So I really hope that the more we understand what the problems are, where the disconnects are, I hope that governments, policymakers, activists will start changing, will start improving access and care.
So transition-related surgeries change sex characteristics to affirm a person's gender identity.
Yes.
So what are these characteristics that you talk about in the article?
Well, see the problem, especially for some of our smaller provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, is that a lot of the surgeries folks want to access, they're not available in the province. So the specific surgeries, that I talked about in the article, people colloquially, refer to them as top surgery or bottom surgery, but we're talking about, chest masculinization, for transmasculine or non-binary folks, or breast augmentation for transfeminine, people. Those would be like the top surgeries, some of the more common ones. And then, bottom surgeries can include vaginoplasty or phalloplasty, and various associated surgeries to those.
And there's also stuff that's done above the neck, like the neck up as well, isn't there?
Yes, and I'm glad you reminded me, because that's a really important part. There, like facial feminization surgery, for example, which is something that very few jurisdictions will cover under public health care. Yukon recently brought in a policy that they do cover it, but most, and I think there's actually a human rights challenge in Nova Scotia to try to get it covered, but most provinces do not cover facial feminization surgery, for instance. And there's also things like, tracheal shave to affect your voice change, or even hair implants, or laser hair removal, electrolysis, all of these kinds of surgeries that help folks, affirm their gender identity, through their physical embodiment.
And just so that I understand, these are all maybe available or not available depending on the province you live in?
That's correct. For example, in Newfoundland, the only surgery that is available is breast augmentation. There is one surgical clinic that offers that. But it's a private clinic. It's not covered by the public healthcare system. So if you want to access that, you've got to pay $8,000 to $10,000 out of your own pocket. For chest masculinization surgery, that is covered by the Newfoundland government. However, there's no surgeon who offers it in province. So Newfoundland will send patients to New Brunswick, where there is a surgeon who does that surgery for them. Bottom surgery is not available in the province, so patients are sent to Montreal for that. That is covered by the government, but patients are sent to Montreal. And when I say that's covered by the government, I'm speaking quite loosely. The government says they cover it, but the reality is that there are patients wind up being stuck with a lot of out-of-pocket costs, which is one of the barriers.
And when you say out-of-pocket costs, what sort of costs are you talking about? Like, are you talking about travel, hotel, that sort of thing?
Yes. Two examples. For chest masculinization surgery, for instance, the government policy says it's covered. However, they only cover the removal of the breasts. They do not cover, a lot of patients need to get liposuction and chest contouring done as well. That's not covered. So that'll often cost patients about $4,000. It's part of the same procedure, but it's not covered. So patients who are going for that surgery wind up getting this $4,000 bill. For surgery, for example, when I went for vaginoplasty in Montreal, transportation is partially covered, and that's a problem. A lot of people are told government will cover everything, but for surgeries that don't happen in the province, which is most of them, government has what they call the Medical Transportation Assistance Program. And what folks discover when they actually try to go for surgery is that it's a cost share program. So government only covers half of your travel and accommodation expenses, which that can be again a bill in the thousands of dollars, depending on where you're going and how long you have to be there for the surgery.
Rhea, you just mentioned about your surgery in Montreal. I have a question for you in regards to being open about talking, about these sort of things, because Laverne Cox had an interview with Katie Couric, where Katie Couric was asking about, that sort of thing on her talk show with Laverne Cox, and Laverne Cox, shut it down, right? And you just, felt free enough, I guess, to mention going to Montreal and as part of your journey. How do you feel about talking and people talking to you about that in interviews, what have you? Because when I saw that interaction between Laverne Cox and Katie Couric, I can understand on one hand where Laverne Cox was coming from, but at the other hand, the other part too is we can't necessarily understand something unless we talk about it in a respectful way, and we kind of, dispel the myths and shine light into something that people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about. How do you land on this?
That's an interesting question. I guess on the one hand, I can also understand why someone would want to not have that conversation. I think sometimes, some people, including media personalities, they really sensationalize the I don't know what the medical side of things, the surgeries and stuff, and I can understand how that can really make people feel unpleasant, when that is when interviewers dwell on that to the exclusion of all else, but I agree with you. I mean, when I came out, I kind of like in an ideal world, I would love to just not have to talk about any of this stuff, but I also do recognize that, I mean, here in Newfoundland there is such poor state of trans healthcare that we have to talk about it, and I agree, we have to educate people so that they understand what these surgeries are, so that they understand what gender affirming healthcare means. I think dispelling the fear and the confusion and the uncertainty is important, and I also think that
and the ignorance around everything.
Totally. Because I think that is what leads. Well, I don't think it's what leads to a lot of the really horrific, things we're seeing, for instance, in the U.S. But I think it feeds it. It helps that kind of transphobia spread.
And you can't. I don't mean to jump in on you, but we can't dispel ignorance by shutting something down. You can only dispel ignorance by bringing something to the light and talking about it, in my opinion, in an honest and respectful way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think it's important as well to, when we try and avoid having these conversations, it makes people think that sometimes it can make people lend the impression that there's something to be ashamed of or something to be fearful of. There's not, being trans is absolutely fantastic. It's not something to be worried about or afraid about or ashamed about. It's great. And I mean, I have the highest praise for the surgical clinic where I went to. It was, I mean, obviously recovery was an ordeal, but it was great service, great support. It was, if you have to have a medical procedure, it was a great all around experience.
So, Rhea, for yourself, when did you come out as trans?
I came out in, I think it was 2019. The pandemic makes time a blur, but it was early 2019.
And had you always, let me ask it this way, when did you start recognizing this about yourself? Like, for me, as a gay person, I've always known I was gay. Like, ever since I was 4 or 5 or something. I've even got photos of me being a little a little drama queen, so to speak, at a really young age. And for yourself and your gender identity, when did that start coalescing and materializing for you that you were transgender? When did that all start happening for you?
Oh, it was in grade 4. I remember I remember the literal moment,
What was that moment?
It was this strange moment where we were chatting with the teacher, I think it was during lunch or something. And, the teacher was having one of these conversations. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I just had this jarring realization that when I saw myself in the future, trying to picture the future me in some career, I could only picture a woman. And it was really jarring and strange to me, and like literally it felt like kind of this glass ceiling kind of breaking, when I thought about it, because it really kind of hit me to my core. And, and then I struggled to kind of understand what that was and come to, what did it mean? This was, people didn't talk openly about trans identities at this time. So it took me several years to realize, oh, there is this thing called transgender. This was in Newfoundland, where we had we had horrifically homophobic, transphobic teachers. I did in school, So it took, several years to really put the exact words to it. But yeah, the realization was there very early on.
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, everyone. This is Mark Tewksbury, Olympic champion, leader, humanitarian. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hitmakers is a full-service, award-winning record label and social enterprise based in Iqaluit, Nunavut. We specialize in the creating and marketing of world-class Inuit and Indigenous music, including pop, hip-hop, rock, folk, and traditional Inuit music. Hitmakers has studios in Iqaluit, Ottawa, and Toronto. The label currently works with more than 20 Inuit and Indigenous artists, and we represent and promote many more. The company was founded in 2016, and our mission is to create viable careers in the arts for Inuit and Indigenous artists through music, media, and education. Our secondary mission is to empower artists to share and strengthen their stories and culture. To learn more, please connect with us on social media or at hitmakers.com. That's Hitmakers with a Z. Thanks for listening. Qoya namit.
So, Rainbow Country airs on independent radio outlets, streaming services, as well as on the NCRA network, the National Campus and Community Radio Association. What do all of these outlets have in common? Well, they are all listener supported to help keep the lights on and the airwaves broadcasting coast to coast to coast. Here are the outlets that carry Rainbow Country. CJUC-FM, The Juice, in Whitehorse, Yukon. CJLY-FM, in Nelson, BC. CFUR-FM, in Prince George, BC. CFCR-FM, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. CKUW-FM, in Winnipeg, Manitoba. CIUT-FM, in Toronto, Ontario, the home of Rainbow Country. CKCU-FM in Ottawa, Ontario. Canoe FM in Haliburton, Ontario's cottage country. CFRC-FM in Kingston, Ontario. CFRU-FM in Guelph, Ontario. CHMR-FM in St. John's, Newfoundland. And Bombshell Radio, a 24/7 streaming outlet. So if you are able to, please consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. If you're listening to the edited podcast version, please consider making a contribution to an outlet that does carry Rainbow Country. And by the way, the full list of outlets that carry Rainbow Country can be found at marktara.com. Just hit the syndication banner. After all, where else but on Rainbow Country will you find episodes featuring topics like the state of trans healthcare in Canada, being gay and being black, out LGBT athletes, and not to mention playing music from queer artists from around the world. Rainbow Country, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And by the way, if you do make a donation, if you do make a contribution, please let me know. Hit me up on my socials at Mark Tara, or send me a personal email, mark@marktara.com. That way I can give you the recognition you deserve for letting your support be known nationally.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us, and of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
I'm Brian Bradley, author of Outrageous Misfits, female impersonator Craig Russell and his wife, Lori Russellidi. You are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Terra.
"2021 was a big year for you. You penned that article, but you also mentioned going to Montreal to, as part of your journey. Uh-huh. And you also had to raise money, did you not?
I did, yeah. And
this is because of what you're talking about in the article, that some things are covered and other things aren't covered.
Exactly. Yeah. And it didn't really hit home until I got the call from the clinic wanting to schedule the surgery. This is another issue, the waiting lists are quite long for a lot of these surgeries. So there's a level of unpredictability, you never know.
Years?
Yeah. I was, on the list for waiting list for 1-2 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. And different procedures, different clinics can take longer as well. But once I got the call, I realized, okay, I have to book my flights. I have to, for bottom surgery, you're actually advised to bring an escort with you, because you're not in, much of a state to look after yourself, during your return travel. So, we had to arrange flights, accommodations, all that stuff, get time off work, make arrangements, for months off work for recovery. And that's when I realized, I don't know if I can afford this, and so I actually had to delay my original surgery date by a little while to make all these arrangements. And then I had to figure out where to come up with the money. And some friends advised me, do a GoFundMe. This is how some other trans friends of mine had funded their surgeries. I felt so awkward, it's hard to go to the public, your friends, and publicly ask for money. You really feel afraid doing that. It's really making yourself vulnerable in a really deep way. But I didn't see any alternative, so I did, and I was so lucky. Folks donated. I think hundreds of people donated funds, and I was able to book the flights and make all the bookings and make it to Montreal for my surgery. I was really thankful, and I was really lucky. Unfortunately, not everyone is able to raise funds that way. It's not really a sustainable model for healthcare, online fundraisers. But I was quite fortunate.
And the place that you went, was this a private clinic?
Yeah, there's historically there's been one clinic that offers vaginoplasty in Canada. It is a private clinic in Montreal, but because it's the only clinic in the country, government allows it to be covered under public health care. Now there are two brand new teams, medical teams, starting to offer the surgery in Toronto and Vancouver, but Montreal has been the go-to spot, generally speaking, for people in Canada going for that surgery.
And did this clinic offer you any guidance or suggestions when it came to how to cover the costs that weren't covered?
Yes and no. Broadly speaking, no. That's pretty much up to the patients. Now they did make a suggestion, which is actually, I'm glad you raise it, because it is important to mention. There is a shadowy organization, but a very good organization in Canada called HOUR. The clinic actually told me about it and said that if I was having financial difficulty, this group had helped other people. I felt, I didn't know anything about them. I felt, the little I was able to learn about them, it sounded like they were kind of a support group for I don't know. I assumed you had to be in some kind of really poverty-stricken situation to access them, partly because there was not a lot of information about them publicly available. I have since talked to folks who have managed to get support through them. So yeah, they're a national charity. They help with medical travel, not just for trans people, but for anyone who needs to travel for medical reasons in Canada. And I do know a few trans people locally who have had all of their travel and accommodations covered by HOUR. I feel I have mixed feelings about this. I mean, I'm glad on the one hand that it exists and offers this service. The fact that that they don't really advertise their services means a lot of people miss out on this, kind of like I did. And also, like, governments pay millions of dollars, donate millions of dollars to this organization. And I just find it rather ironic that governments will donate to a charity to help people travel for medical expenses, but governments won't actually make it accessible within their own internal policies, their own provincial healthcare systems. So that is a charity that does help folks out if they have no other route for covering medical travel.
So a statistic from the Canadian Psychiatric Association, 77% of transgender individuals seriously consider suicide, 43% attempted suicide. Do those stats surprise you?
No, they don't, sadly. One of the things that kept me in the closet for so long, I two trans people I knew or growing up killed themselves. So I had kind of, I had seen firsthand, I guess, how the impact gender dysphoria can have when you're not able to get the supports the supports. A project I'm working on right now is researching the queer history here in the province, and it is so jarring and shocking. Out of a lot of the early trans activists that I've been reading about, from the 1990s, how many of them are not with us, and so many of them, died tragically early, and it's the struggle really took its toll on them. So unfortunately, I'm not surprised. It really speaks to how important it is to make sure that gender affirming healthcare is available and accessible to people. It's the medical supports. We have them. They're there, and they can do amazing help when people access them. So it's really infuriating that governments continue to make it so difficult for folks to get these very effective supports that are out there.
So transforming transition-related surgeries in Newfoundland, this article that you wrote in summer of 2021, is this article based on your own personal journey?
It was I didn't research. I didn't focus on myself because I wanted it to be more objective. But it was inspired by my journey. Yes, that's what drove me to start researching the subject and writing about it. But I spoke to other folks about their experiences. Patients and medical practitioners.
And since it's been out, because it's been out about a year.
Yeah.
Since it's been out, how's the response been?
Good, I suppose. I think.
Have you gotten feedback at all?
Yeah, a lot of folks have expressed that, that there's a lot of mystification around things like what is covered, what is not covered, why is it covered, how is it covered. So I think articles like this that really kind of lay it out, find the answers. So many of these answers are just hidden and not accessible to the public. So I think getting the answers to these questions is helps people to at least understand how things currently stand when it comes to gender affirming healthcare, and gives people a basis on which to figure out, okay, what do we need to change? Unless we understand what it is that's not working about a policy, we can't figure out how to change that policy. So I think and hope it's created a foundation for activists to push for practical changes.
Are you writing a book?
I am, yeah.
On
the queer history of Newfoundland in the 20th century.
And how is that going?
It's exciting. It's taken over my life. It's been kind of my pandemic project. I became interested in the subject some years ago. I was helping out organize one of the St. John's Pride festivals, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what number Pride is this? How long has Pride been celebrated in St. John's? No one knew, and so I hit the archives to try to figure it out, and I went to our local archives, and they had this worn, dog-eared file folder that was labeled homosexuals. and it was basically all these newspaper clippings that had been collected over the years about queer anything. And I just lost an entire day pouring through these news articles, like learning so much. And I remember thinking at that point, gosh, someone needs to write a book about this before all these articles like dissolve into dust. And when the pandemic hit, and I had a lot more, spare time, locked down, I decided that now's the time to do it.
So do you have a release date in mind, a time frame?
Yeah, well, I've been so initially I did like archival work, and then I started reaching out to some of the activists and just folks who lived here. So I've been interviewing people who were around during the time. And I'm trying to clue up my interviews now. It's like, you interview one person, then they introduce you to 3 more people. So I've done, I guess, upwards of 70 interviews now with different queer elders from the 20th century. And I'm, hoping to get the draft in the next couple of months. And we're hoping to get the book out before the end of the year. That
Wow.
is our optimistic goal.
Wow. And how do you feel about that? Will this be your first book?
It will, yeah. I'm really excited, like I have learned so much. Like there is just such a rich and vibrant queer history in Newfoundland that I never knew was there. It's been amazing reading about activists back in the 70s, and just the community that existed back in the 70s. And
how far back have you been able to trace?
Oh my goodness! So the first kind of official queer organization was founded in 1974 in St. John's. But I mean, there are queer, there are gay and lesbian people I have traced back to the 1800s. There was very eccentric American actually who moved here in the 1860s, and he was a character. And then in the early 20th century, there are. I was reading today about a couple of lesbian nurses in World War I. Like there's just such a vibrant history. And I mean, one of the early markers, just to give you a sense. In 1925, there was a priest in Trinity Bay who wrote for the big St. John's newspaper, and he wrote this kind of op-ed where he reflected on World War I that had just happened, and then he started writing about how there's folks who look down on men who. How did he put it? Like the love of David for Solomon, I think is what the old euphemism, men who express love for each other. But he says, we just got through this massive, terrible war, and in the face of all this war and destruction that plagues the world, what's wrong? Why should we feel so bad about, when people find love, isn't that what matters? And shouldn't we respect it no matter what form love takes? So, I mean, this is someone writing back in 1925 in a public newspaper in Newfoundland. So, that kind of stuff is really exciting to see.
Any thoughts? While you were talking to me, I'm like having all these images pop into my mind. So have you thought or entered, have yourself entertained the thought of potentially at some point this might be a documentary?
Oh, that would be really exciting too. I haven't thought about it. No, that's not really, I guess, film is not something I've done. But
one thing at a time.
Yeah. One thing I am kind of working on at the same time is putting together a walking tour here in St. John's of queer history. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping to actually get that on the go this summer.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. You'll have to come and see all the spots.
Hey. But I can absolutely see a documentary of what you're talking about.
That would be great. I mean, I would love to see that happen.
So do you have a working title or something for this novel, this book? Not a novel, but this book?
Yeah, we've been, my early working title was A Queer History of Newfoundland, but I'm not sure how queer it is in a theoretical sense. It's more of a straightforward history. So we're now looking at Queer Newfoundland, a history of community and activism.
Love it. Whatever you decide, it will be fantastic.
Thank you.
I have no doubt. Maybe even some sort of a radio special.
Yeah, I was hoping
you might do.
Yeah, a radio documentary would be really, really cool.
Yeah.
Especially since a lot of these activists are still around, it would be great to, I've had the fortune to talk to them, but I think it would be great to let others hear their stories firsthand as well.
Your interviews, are you recording them?
Yes.
Okay. So, hey, CHMR FM, there just might be some sort of a multi-part series there.
That would be great, You
never know.
Yeah, I think it's so important to document these histories because they can so easily be lost, So I'm really glad that I've been able to talk to these people about their lives and get all this wonderful information down.
To document, to archive, but to also to share.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because we have to know our history, because a lot of times it just gets, it goes unrecorded.
Absolutely. And there's so many times when I've reached out to people to interview and I've told them I'm writing, a book on Newfoundland's queer history, and they'll say, oh, it must be a really small book. But no, there is such a deep, vibrant history, and I just want it all to be documented and shared with the world.
Rhea Rollmann, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark.
To read Rhea Rollmann's full article, Transforming Transition-Related Surgeries in Newfoundland, simply search on Google theindependent.ca trans healthcare. That will lead you directly to Rhea Rollmann's article on The Independent.
Phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, well, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors.
My name is Charles Officer, and I'm the writer and director of Invisible Essence, The Little Prince. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So during my interview with award-winning journalist and radio programmer Rhea Rollmann, she mentioned about an organization called HOUR. Well, HOUR is Canada's only national charity offering free travel and accommodations for Canadians in financial need who must access medical care far from their home. Over 10 million Canadians live outside a large city center. 3.2 million Canadians live below the poverty line. The high cost of accessing healthcare is 10% of the barrier patients face when it comes to getting medical healthcare. For over 36 years, HOUR has helped Canadian individuals and families access healthcare. To find out more, simply visit hopeair.com.
Hey, this is Rye Daisies, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
In 2015, I had the pleasure of chatting with award-winning recording artist Lorraine Zagato to talk about some of the legacy of the iconic Canadian song and LGBT anthem that she co-wrote, Rise Up.
Let's backtrack a year. World Pride, North America's very first World Pride, held here in Toronto. And the Pride Committee chose Rise Up as the official theme for World Pride. Tell me what that meant to you. Tell me what that means to you, Lorraine.
Well, I know that as writers of the song, we were deeply honored to know that somehow that song had representation, and it had a feeling that people connected with it still after all those years, and they still saw it as something that meant something very significant to them. So for me, it was a great honor and a thrill, and a kind of almost wishing and hoping to see what would happen if the youth, if another generation of people would pick up the meaning of the song and the importance of the song for themselves. So a curiosity question mark. Like, I wonder if they'll get, what the time and place was for us when we first brought that song out.
So what were you hoping that the youth would pick up on then?
Well, for instance, I remember the first time that I played Pride with Parachute Club and played Rise Up, there were 500 people running across the field at U of T Circle there. That's where the big stage was. The big stage was 8 feet wide,
right?
After the march. And partially they were running across the field because they were terrified that people were running after them. And partially they were running because we were playing Rise Up, and it had just gone on the radio and stuff. And I always keep that in my mind because a lot of people talk to me about that. They talk to me about, there was this period of time, and it was almost kind of a frightening time to be gay or queer or lesbian in the community at that time. There was still a lot of we hadn't got to where we are now.
Right.
And so the time in between Rise Up was released and Rise Up in 2015, so many amazing things have happened.
Right.
I think, though, that sometimes we forget on whose shoulders we stand.
Yeah.
The people that came before us. And I know for myself that the people that came before me are the shoulders that I stand on, that gave me the courage to say things or to do things. So I was kind of hoping that people would, be interested in awakening to, hey, this is what was going on when Rise Up was first released.
Right.
Here's what was going on in our community.
So, looking back a year ago and now, do you get a sense that people sort of, the younger generation, they tuned in, you think?
No.
And
I don't mean it in a negative way at all, because I just think that there are different things going on now in our community. There are different issues. There are many similar and common issues, but the issues that the youth are dealing with today are quite different than the ones we dealt with.
Sure.
So, I don't think they've twigged to it yet, but it's not over.
Yeah, it's never over.
No.
As far as we've come, there's way more to go.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? In terms of equality and just being equal.
Well, and I think too, it's really interesting as I get to travel a lot. I think, wow, we're really in a bubble here in Toronto. Or if you're in a large city, you're in a bubble.
Yeah.
You may feel safer and you may feel like a lot of things have changed, and they have. But all you have to do is travel 2 hours north of Toronto into a small town and whatever, and there's still a lot of homophobia.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of fear. There's still a lot of people who don't quite yet know. It's just unskilled behavior. Half the time, homophobia is a kind of unskilled behavior because people don't know. They're fearful of what they don't know and don't understand. And so there's a lot to go.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators' backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. If you would like to keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast for Rainbow Country is available on all major platforms, including audible.com and iHeartRadio. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.